Well, thank you all very much. It is a great honor. I'm not going to be, obviously, people that know me know that I can't be as eloquent as Dave McAuliffe in describing how I feel right now. But coming back to your hometown, to your home states of Missouri and Kansas, it really does feel good. And I thank you, Carl, and I thank the board. I thank the folks that put on this terrific event. I know there's a lot of people that worked very hard to make this go smoothly. Master Sergeant, it's an honor to be on stage with you. We had a chance to talk last night and again today, and you exemplify the best of the folks that wear the uniform today, and we have men and women that do amazing things every day, and you're a perfect example, and honored to be here with you. General Petraeus, Dave, we've fought a lot of wars. The easiest one was probably the one you really fought. The hardest ones were the bureaucratic wars, and we fought a lot of those. And we won some, we lost some, and some we got rained out. But we worked it very hard. I've got to acknowledge some special friends. Table 13, I don't know how you got that lucky number, folks, but basically the business that my brother ran here for a long while until he passed away a little over 2 years ago, and Myers Brothers of Kansas City. I'm just glad you all got through security. I think that's, I think that's terrific, and glad to have you here. And then Ed and Linda McConwell and Mr. Sell, I don't know where you're sitting, but over there somewhere. Well, and lots of other friends, Bob Cannon and so forth, and fraternity brothers, schoolmates in high school and college, and just lots of friends here in Kansas City. It turns out that I have a couple of heroes in life, two presidential heroes, one Eisenhower, one Truman. And I was really turned on to Truman because he's from your hometown, of course, but then you read, I think it was my brother that gave me the book Truman by Dave McAuliffe, and you get into his legacy and the kind of president he was, and quite remarkable. I never met the man, but my brother and I came very close to meeting President Truman. So the story goes that my mom knew his secretary back in Washington. And so we go on a family vacation in the early 50s. And we're about 8 and 10 years old. And we're looking at the sites in Washington, D.C., and at the point in time we go to the White House, and we're ushered in the White House, and we're put in the cabinet room, and we're kind of parked there until the president is free to come in and shake hands with some folks from back home. And two young guys, and we were running around in the Rose Garden, which we weren't supposed to do, but you can't really contain an 8 and a 10-year-old, and we were kind of feisty, and we never got to see the president. Apparently he had better things to do, or other things to do, or it may have been they just got tired of trying to corral us and said, would you please take these couple of spunky kids and take them somewhere else. So we never got to meet the president, but we came very, very close. And I still remember the day very well. And since then, of course, I've been back in that cabinet room, not as a cabinet official, but as a military advisor, and it always brought back memories. And I said, well, yeah, I was here, 50 years ago. I remember this pretty well. There is a quote that I think sums up why we should consider President Truman a hero. And you probably all know this quote, but it was something that Winston Churchill said in 1952. And if you'll permit me, I'll read it. This was his, talking about the first time that Churchill met Truman back in 1945, and I think it was summer 1945 at a Potsdam conference. And here's what Winston Churchill said in 52 about that meeting. He said, I must confess, sir, I held you in very low regard. I loathed your taking the place of Franklin Roosevelt. I misjudged you badly. Since that time, you more than any other man have saved Western civilization. That's probably why we are all gathered here today, because we're talking about a great man. When you talk about the military culture and the fact that I stayed in the service for over 40 years, it was never the plan. The plan was to get in and 5 years later be working at Myers Brothers. Who knows, we might have had 2 tables or something. I don't think it'd been table 1. No, we didn't have 2 tables. Probably not. What kept me in the service, besides the initial thrill of flying and the camaraderie, were the values and the culture of the military. The fact that integrity really counts, and you count on the people in the military on your right and your left for your very life. So You're used to dealing with people that have great integrity, that are going to be true to their word. And it's a good environment to work in. The concept of selfless service, to serving something above yourself, was always appealing. And so it felt good, to get up in the morning, no matter what time the flight brief was, and to get off to work. It always felt good, no matter what the hour, how dark it was outside, and what the mission was. But there was another thing that I felt very good about being in the military, and it had a lot to do with President Truman. And that was that it was a culture of no discrimination. And of course, it was President Truman who desegregated the United States military, as General Petraeus mentioned. A very important concept, but the kind of culture that I enjoyed working in, one where you're promoted on your own merits and not what color you are, or what religion you are, or even where you went to school. You could go to K-State and look what could happen. And so I think we owe President Truman quite a bit. There are a lot of things in this world today that cause me concern, but none greater than the current security environment that we're in. And I've talked about this a lot. I talked about it when I was in uniform. But I feel the current security environment that Carl talked about in terms of a violent extremist is a serious threat to our way of life. In fact, I characterize it as the most serious threat to our democracy and our way of life, and our friends and allies for that matter, than any we faced since the Civil War. And the reason I say that are for two reasons. One is violent extremists using terror as a method instill fear in our minds, and fear is a very dangerous thing, and it sort of inhibits all human progress. You can be paralyzed, as we know, by fear. And if you think back to 9/11 and just how you felt on that day and how you acted in the following weeks and months, you'll probably have to admit to yourself that fear of that event, or that event, caused a certain trepidation, and you changed your behavior to some degree. And the second thing that goes with that, and why I really worry about it, is that these violent extremists, if they could, would use more violent means. And those means are available. Fortunately, they have not, to the best of our knowledge, fallen in the hands of violent extremists. But of course, I'm talking about biological weapons or nuclear weapons. And maybe not even nuclear yield. Maybe it's just a radiological device. You say just, serious weapons that they would use if they could, and they would kill us, or they would kill your children or your grandchildren, and they wouldn't shed a tear. In fact, they would dance for joy. So it's a very serious threat. We have, I think, a pretty good strategy for the short term, but the long-term strategy has to be, and it was what I was talking about in my testimony that you referenced, the long-term strategy has to be to create an environment on this planet where men and women don't want to join, in this case, jihad, which is the subject of today. But it could be anything. And so what is the solution? The solution is not necessarily military, although military will play a part. But it is the political and the educational and the economic, diplomatic solutions. And it's going to be a long time before we get to that stage. It's going to be an awfully long time. I think the coming decades will be like the Cold War was. And we still don't have our strategy together, not even, in my view, particularly well in this country, but we certainly don't have the international strategy that's going to provide the kind of climate where we can all walk the streets of whatever city you want to walk without fear of something perhaps bad happening. I think it is terrific that the international students are here, that they were recognized. I met with each one of them before the luncheon. There was a young man here from Saudi Arabia. I didn't know if I saw him stand up or not, so I don't know if he is still, there he is. And we had a chance to talk for a moment, as I did with all the students. And he's studying here in the United States. He intends to go back to Saudi Arabia, and he wants to take back to Saudi Arabia something about Americans and try to bridge the cultural gaps and the knowledge gaps that exist between our two cultures. And I think that will probably happen in each of the cases of the people sitting around those two tables of wonderful international students. And in the end, that's probably the answer. It's education, and it's people that understand and are tolerant of different cultures and different ways of life, so that we can get to that end state that I was talking about, where young men and women don't feel like they have to go out and commit some of these atrocities and uncivilized acts that we see today. There's we've been speaking about David McAuliffe, and I'll just end with this, because how many have read his book? Came out, I think, last year, 1776. Have we had some folks read the book? I think it's a terrific book for lots of reasons. And we had David McCullough come to an off-site meeting of our senior leadership on the Joint Chiefs of Staff and had him talk about the book 1776. And we kind of had a chance to ask him a lot of questions and kind of delve into it. It's a remarkable book for lots of reasons. But the reason I'd like to highlight is that in the middle of that not very good year for this group of folks that thought they ought to be separate from the United Kingdom, from Great Britain, that we ought to break away from all that. Militarily, we were not doing very well. It turns out we picked a general that wasn't very good at generaling early on, that General Washington. He learned, he got a lot better, but he had to learn by leaving Boston and New York and working his way south, basically getting beat until the very end of the year, when had some modest success in New Jersey. In the middle of this year, and went from an army of tens of thousands to an army of 2,000 or 3,000 at the end of the year, and they were ragtag. They had very little equipment or clothing. They would freeze, as you read the book, they would freeze to death on post just because they didn't have the clothing to stay warm. In the midst of all that, in the middle of that year, not a very good year for this fledgling country we now know as America, our forefathers wrote the Declaration of Independence. You know, you think about optimism, holy mackerel, that was a pretty optimistic thing to do, because it wasn't much to point to the fact that we were going to be successful in this endeavor. And of course, if you weren't successful, those folks that signed it, they were pledging their lives and their fortunes and their families' lives, and we all know that. But the part about the book I like the best is that you think about our Declaration of Independence, you think about our Constitution, you think about the Bill of Rights. And they're wonderful pieces of parchment, they're great prose, but they don't mean a thing, and they'll never come to life unless people are willing to sacrifice to bring them to life. And you might think I'm thinking about soldiers, troops, military. I'm not. I'm thinking about all of us in this room. I'm thinking about no matter what walk of life you're in, what you do, whether you're the president of Rockhurst University, or you're the rabbi we met last night, or you're in Chicago, or you're a business person or in the medical profession, or you are in the military. One thing we must have learned after September 11th is that we want to make this world a better world. We all have to be in it together. We all have to put our shoulder to the wheel, as they say, and try to make it a better world. And that's one of the lessons of 1776. If people hadn't been willing to sacrifice in those days, then we wouldn't have the United States of America that we have today. And it's worth a read if you haven't read it, just to remind yourself that this all doesn't come easily. This comes through sacrifice, and it's going to continue to come through community involvement and continuous sacrifice. And I think that's another legacy that we've learned from President Truman. I have a quote that I'm going to end with. David Petraeus is a historian. He probably will be able to. If you recognize this quote, sing out, because I'm not going to tell who it's from, but it's somebody that President Truman knew quite well, and his name has been mentioned here earlier today. And while it's, you know, an American sort of quote, I think it has a lot of applicability in the countries that are represented back here as well. The quote goes like this, because I think everybody appreciates the word that I'm going to start with. And the quote goes like this: freedom. No word has ever held out greater need for sacrifice. Needed more to be nurtured, blessed more the giver, damned more its destroyer, or came closer to being God's will on earth. May America ever be its protector. And the person who said that was General Omar Bradley, 1948, the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thank you very much.